Today I'm going to talk about the preamble of the Constitution. Okay. The preamble is introduction, which declares the purpose of a document. At the time the Constitution was written, that was pretty common in legal documents and such to put a preamble declaring your purpose. And this, the preamble was actually not even proposed until pretty late in the Constitutional Convention. And it initially was proposed a pretty brief one that didn't say very much. And then Governor Morris, who was a member of the Committee of Style, in the last week or so, a couple weeks of the convention, went through to make sure that the style of how things were said in the Constitution was good. And he composed this preamble. He was also a delegate from Pennsylvania. So the preamble he composed and was accepted was, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." As you can see in my in my background, I have the text of the first page of the written official copy of the Constitution, and you can see it starts out with the preamble at the top, "We the people," in large letters, and then of the United States, and continues on. Above the Article 1 is the preamble. So it starts out, "We the people of the United States." So this is pointing out that the origin of sovereignty is the people. That the sovereignty, the power, political power, originates in the people. And the only legitimate place government can receive that sovereignty is from the people. So the Constitution is an agreement between the people to grant certain limited powers to the federal government, and with other powers being reserved to the states or the people. The 10th Amendment clearly states that any power not explicitly granted to the federal government is reserved for the states or the people. The Constitution was also ratified by conventions elected by the people in each of the states. So they said that rather than having the state legislatures vote on it, that they wanted the people to elect ratifying conventions to debate and decide if they should accept the Constitution or not. Another reason that it might not list the states it would be problematic if some of the states didn't actually ratify the Constitution. They'd initially proposed a preamble that listed all the states, but they decided against that because potentially the Constitution would take effect when 9 states ratified it in those particular states. But if some states decide never to join, it'd be kind of bad to list the states that didn't join. But in the end, they all did join, even Rhode Island, which was the last to ratify it. This contrasts with what we see in the Articles of Confederation, which states in its preamble, "Articles of Confederation and perpetual union between the states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay," and on down. They listed all of the states. But the Articles of Confederation was an agreement between states, whereas the Constitution is an agreement between the people of the United States. And it continues, "In order to form a more perfect union." So this was to improve on the existing and the plainly lacking union under the Articles of Confederation. The Articles were weak in a number of ways, particularly in that they needed unanimous support from all 13 states, and also that the Congress had no power to tax. So everyone recognized that the Articles of Confederation were a problem. And that was the whole reason that they had a constitutional convention in the first place, was to fix the shortcomings of the Articles of Confederation. In order to form a more perfect union is also stating that union already exists, but that they're improving on this and they're working towards perfection, even if they haven't achieved it yet. Continues with, "Establish justice." The most basic legitimate purpose of a government is establishing justice, because almost no one wants to live under an anarchy. 1 Peter 2:14 says governments are to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. And justice occurs 128 times in the Bible, 30 in Isaiah alone. So it's a very important concept to God. In fact, justice is an attribute of God. In 1 Kings 3:11, God commends Solomon for asking for discernment in administering justice. So because he asked wisely, God granted him that wisdom, wisdom in administering justice, as well as wealth and long life and many other blessings. But God commended him because Solomon saw that discernment in administering justice was most important for him as king. Another verse in Isaiah 42, 3 and 4, God's righteous servant is in faith says, or it says about God's righteous servant, in faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on the earth. And could go on to so many other verses, but we see that justice is incredibly important to God, and therefore it's also important for us. We continue with ensure domestic tranquility. Okay, so maybe this is a little more difficult to understand, but we have the phrase law and order. So law is the established justice part, and the order part is ensure domestic tranquility. In 1 Timothy 2, we see, pray for those in authority that they may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. I like to live peaceful and quiet lives. That's a good thing. So that's why it says we should ensure domestic tranquility. In the Article 4, Section 4, it says Congress shall protect states against domestic violence when their legislatures request it, and to guarantee each state a Republican form of government. So both these are ways that we can ensure domestic tranquility, that we can have an ordered and peaceful life within our country. So Republican form of government gives us the ability to elect representatives that to represent us in government, and also that everyone exists under the law, that we're all subject to the law, not to the whim of the majority rule or to the whim of a king, but that we all have to abide by the same set of laws. In the early years of America, there were a number of rebellions that were put down peacefully. Shays' Rebellion occurred just the year before the Constitutional Convention took place. So they understood that it was important to have a peaceful setting within the country, and that people to be able to get along well together. The next phrase is provide for the common defense. So Article 4, Section 4 also says that it shall protect each of them against invasion, each of the states against invasion. So the national government has an obligation to protect each state against invasion. And one of the basic purposes of government is to protect people against foreign attacks. So this was the initial reason the colonies had banded together in the first place. They were fighting against the oppression of the British. And the framers realized that it was necessary to be able to defend the country, but they were also afraid that a standing army could be used against the people to curtail liberties. So there was a balancing act. They understood the need for defense, but also that there can be a threat from a standing army. So to help alleviate this threat, they had elected civilian leaders in charge of the army, and they also gave the people the right to keep and bear arms, which is the Second Amendment. Promote the general welfare. So before the Civil War, Congress and most of the presidents saw this as a restriction on any spending which did not benefit the nation as a whole. Well, we've come a long way away from that view, but for quite a while, both Congress and the president saw that general welfare meant the welfare, the good for the good of the entire nation, not for any one section or one small group, but spending needed to benefit the entire nation together. So even Alexander Hamilton, who was in favor of a stronger federal government, thought a constitutional amendment would be needed before the federal government could spend money on internal improvements, such as canals or dredging rivers and harbors and things like that. because that would only benefit a particular region. If you dredge Boston Harbor, it only benefits Boston. It doesn't benefit other colonies or other states. So they even things like that they saw as not being appropriate for the general welfare. Um, Monroe vetoed a bill because it would only benefit a certain area and not promote the general welfare. So this was a strongly held belief in the early days of our republic. Um, Today, we've moved far away from that, and now they're willing to spend money on almost anything and everything. Um, but if we had such restraint as this, our federal deficit would not be nearly so big. In fact, I think we wouldn't have a deficit or a debt. Um, and it also says government is to promote, not to provide. So promoting the general welfare says that we should have equal opportunities, equal justice under the law, and equal rights to pursue opportunities, but not equal outcomes. It's not saying everyone's guaranteed equal outcome, but we should have equal opportunities to pursue our freedoms. Um, it continues to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So this Constitution establishes law so that our God-given liberties can be exercised freely in a secure legal environment. Um, and it explicitly sets limits on government power, such as suspending the writ of habeas corpus against bills of attainder and ex post facto trials, ex post facto laws, trials by jury. So these are securing individual liberties. So it's not only securing liberty of states, but individuals. Every person has their liberties secured by this Constitution. Um, the Fifth Amendment says that a person shall not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So it's clear that individual people have their liberties and rights. And this is echoing the Declaration of Independence, which says they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we see that in both the Declaration and the Constitution, that individual liberties are a very important aspect that it's working hard to secure for each person within their country. And these blessings are gifts from God. Leviticus 25:10 says, "Proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants." This is the verse that's inscribed on our Liberty Bell. And 2 Corinthians 3:17 says, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom." So we see that liberty and freedom are blessings from God. And so we want to secure these blessings. Our actual rights being given by God are not dependent on taking anything from someone else. So this is a good test of what's an actual right versus what people claim to be a right. Today, people claim many things to be rights, um, but real rights, by their definition, are given by God. So it doesn't require something to be taken from someone else to give us a real right that we have. For example, the freedom of speech. I can talk and say anything I want. That doesn't cost anyone else anything. I can open my mouth and speak, but that doesn't mean that I have the right to force anyone to hear me. People can choose to listen or not as they see fit. Um, for example, or the freedom to worship God freely. That doesn't cost or impose on anyone else. That's my own right between me and God. Whereas things people often claim to be rights today, say the right to health care, well, that requires forcing or compelling in some way, a doctor to treat me, or someone to give money to pay a doctor to treat me, or with the right to housing, that requires someone to either give me a house, or requires compelling someone to build me a house, or compelling someone to give money to pay for a house for me to live in. So healthcare and housing and things are not rights in this sense. Um, it might be they're nice to have, but they're not rights. They're not given by God. That's compelling others to provide them for me. So if you have to compel someone to provide a service or to give money to provide a service or a good, that's not a right. Um, so our rights are given from God and not dependent on taking something from someone else. So that's a important definition for what's an actual right. And this is to be a stable system for generations to come. Um, it's for our posterity, not just for the current generation. So it concludes with, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So the Constitution continues the principles stated in the Declaration of Independence for which Americans had fought a revolution. And to secure these hard-won liberties was not only for themselves, but for future generations. So they wanted them preserved. So for these reasons, the people established this Constitution for the United States of America. I wanted to touch again on the wisdom of the founding fathers in separating the powers and the sovereignty of the people. So people are fallen sinners, according to Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So the founders understood this human nature, that we're sinful, that it's dangerous to give too much power to any one person or group. So therefore, they separated the powers. They separated them into legislative, executive, and judicial branches. So separating types of power: legislative, the power to make laws; executive, to execute or carry out the laws; the judicial, the power to interpret the laws. So different types of power are separated. They also separated different levels of power. So federal, state, local, and the people. Um, so they're just distributing types of power and levels of power. So the federal government in the Constitution is given certain powers. Other powers are reserved for the states or for the people. So they've split up the government and the power as much as possible. And they limited the government. The Bill of Rights limits the power of any government, any of these levels of government, to protect the rights of the people. So they didn't trust any government with very much power. So they separated and divided it as much as possible while still allowing it um, enough means to work. They didn't want an anarchy. So they understood that government has a needed role, but they wanted to limit it from getting out of hand and trampling the rights of the people. And as we see the next verse, Romans 3:24, people can be redeemed. All are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. So they trusted people to govern their own lives. Because we're subject to God, they wanted people's lives to be ruled by God's laws, for people to voluntarily obey God. Therefore, they wouldn't have to have a large government um, their lives. And they trusted the people to have the sovereign power, as we see in the opening phrase of the Constitution, we the people. So the people are granting the sovereign power, they have some aspect of it, to the government to operate as a federal government, controlling certain aspects of our lives. Um, but also that the people have no direct means to exercise power. So even though the people are sovereign, they don't really trust the people entirely either. Um, So they give the people no direct means to exercise power. We can only exercise our sovereign power through elections, through our representatives. So that limits how the people can also exercise power. So our whole structure of government is limiting power, so that freedoms and liberties are not trampled. So now as we read the preamble again, maybe we can have a more full understanding of what's behind these words. So we'll conclude with, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Thank you.